Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, which is using your APM tools to drive your DevOps initiative. This webinar is proudly brought to you by HP Enterprise and Vivit, your HP user community. My name is Mihai Grigorescu, and I will be your moderator for the day. I've been a Vivit TQA SIG lead for a couple of years now and been doing a few webinars on my own. The topic is very dear to me, and we have two of our great speakers from HP, which are John Keys and Shane Collins. A bit about John and Shane. John has more than 20 years of product management, and he has started his journey into APM roughly 10 years ago, working for different companies, and now he is a product marketing manager with HP Enterprise. Whereas Shane has worked, he's a vet basically. He's got over 30 years of experience working in the software industry. A lot of that time spent in research and development, and he has held some key managerial positions in IT operations management, and is helping currently customers define IT value chain and reference architecture. Has helped the client define the IT value chain and reference architecture, and both of John and Shane will take us through the great subject of DevOps. But before we do that, I'd like to do a bit of housekeeping with you. So this live session is being recorded. All the Vivit webinars and recording of this webinar are found within the Vivit website and are available to all the Vivit members. If you have any questions, you will notice on the right-hand side questions. You can dock it or undock it, and you can actually post your questions in there. There's also a chat button at the bottom of the screen, which you can use to chat to your fellow peers that are attending the webinar. And this is a picture of how the control panel looks like. You should be able to see it on your screen. To submit a question, just make sure you type your question there and press submit. Or send, sorry, not submit. That's pretty much it about the housekeeping. And without further ado, I'll pass on to John. So, John, all yours.
Thank you, Mihai. Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar. Today, we're talking about organizations with mature DevOps processes and how they're using APM to drive an exceptional customer experience. So let's take a look at kind of the root of this study. Back in August, we did some qualitative research where we spoke directly to developers and asked them about their usage of APM for DevOps. Among those that we interviewed were some unicorns. They are companies that use DevOps nearly exclusively and are often in high-tech and e-com. And what was really striking to me was what came out of these interviews was that they used APM differently than the rest of the interviewees. So this is a verbatim response, and you can see from that response how important APM was to them. And here's another example where the DevOps team is really relying on APM as part of their software lifecycle. And when we look at these unicorns, we know that these type of companies are driving the new economy and are disruptive in their categories, and that they are acutely aware that a proactive approach is required to ensure the type of customer experience they're trying to deliver. And what is the business value of this delivery? The business value is differentiation. It is because software is driving differentiation in the new economy. And when we look at these unicorns, these companies that are excellent using DevOps, they are coming from companies like all of the ones listed here. And all of these companies are representative of this new innovation level. The best example for me is Apple, which has built their company by delivering an exceptional user experience driven by software. So if we think about this differentiation, we have to identify how that happens. And that differentiation occurs through rapid innovation. Innovating faster than your competitor, innovate faster than your competitors, and you'll drive success in your organization. And this is why we have DevOps. So Shane, let's take a pause here. And can you tell us how DevOps has changed the game in respect to innovation?
Yeah, thanks, John. You know, what I see is it's changing the application lifecycle that we see in companies. You know, basically, traditionally, releases are pretty infrequent. They take a while to get into production. And what we're seeing is people have to move to more frequent and smaller releases. And over the last decade, I've talked to a lot of companies, interviewed a lot of people both on the dev side and the ops side, and I've seen people start to build those agile approaches, especially on the dev side, but what we're still lacking is much movement on the ops side. And so today we're going to talk a little more about that. So let me talk about this increasing velocity. And if you look at the top of this picture, the kind of the grayish lines, you see the waterfall method, right, going back and forth. But it's not just waterfall. Even an agile lifecycle follows the same steps. The key is making sure that there's that feedback on the bottom. Without that feedback and creating a closed loop system, you can't increase the velocity.
Okay. So what we're saying here is that the DevOps requirement is real, and kind of like based on those aha moments I had with those interviews with the DevOps unicorns, we actually commissioned a quantitative study from Dimensional Research to look at companies that were doing software development and trying to define how those companies are using application performance management differently from companies with these slower development cycles. So let's take a peek at some of that data. So as part of the survey, we asked the developers to rate the customer experience of their apps. And if we look at companies who have daily or more frequent deployments, so the bar on the right, 42% of the respondents report that their customer experience was excellent. So the more frequent the deployments, the better the customer experience. You know, this is really striking. Shane, what do you think the reason behind this stat is?
You know, I think it comes back to the pace of releases. The customers that scored the highest here are getting those releases out quickly, and what those releases are allowing is sort of that competitive functionality to make it into the products, as well as making sure that the I would say if there's any issues out there, they're quickly fixed the next day, right? So customers don't have to suffer with a poor experience or suffer from lack of innovation. So it's that pace of releases that really is there.
Okay, and so when we talk about pace of releases, so we're looking at 3 different levels here: monthly, weekly, and daily. I describe those as daily as a mature DevOps organization, or would you agree with that description, that they're more mature?
Yeah, I agree. They're basically, the mature organizations can streamline the whole cycle so that multiple steps in this DevOps process are all happening at the same time. That allows potentially daily releases that were could have been started a month ago, but the key is there's a lot of teams working, so there's constant new flow of functionality coming out.
Okay. And I'd also like to point out the prevalence of an excellent customer experience is nearly double from when we look at monthly on the left side to weekly, and that improves to more than triple when deployments go from monthly to daily. So we know that DevOps is driving results. So let's take a look at how companies get to this state of DevOps.
So here we're seeing the transition that John was talking about. It starts with where a lot of companies were, and I'm going to say 5 years ago, with an annual or biannual release cycle. Get it out every year, let's say in the fall, to get ready for the Christmas season, whatever was happening. But we also know that Agile has been building up a lot over the last decade in turning out more frequent releases. But still, as I mentioned before, if you look at step 2 in the Agile box, typically sort of the deployment and getting it into production, getting all the monitoring set up has been lagging. And with a lot of pressure, in fact, I was meeting with a customer yesterday that spent the last 2 years working on that deployment side, right? Automating that so that they can get out. In their case, they were just trying to get out monthly and some quarterly releases. They want to move to weekly, but that still doesn't make them yet a mature organization. Mature organization, ideally, when people have said it's ready for production or, towards the end of the cycle, simply clicking on the right script, right, pushing the right button is going to push that out. And that's where people have automated as many steps as possible, orchestrated those together, and they're ready to go.
Cool. So we know that the companies aspire to be this mature DevOps. What are the real keys to getting there?
So let's step through that. I think the first thing is increasing innovation. And what I mean, I'm sorry, increasing automation. What I mean by that, is not trying to automate end-to-end DevOps here. What we're trying to do is say there are a lot of opportunities, be that in dev, testing, deployment, monitoring, everywhere in this cycle, there's spots that can be automated. And what you do is you start with that low-hanging fruit, right? You get those SMEs in there, the subject matter experts, and get them to automate it correctly. Because when they automate those routine tasks correctly, you can just run them over and over again, right? They're all repeatable. And since they were done by experts, they're pretty much error-free. And that's the first place you want to start, is increase this automation. Then what we get to is, now that you have a set of automation spread throughout the lifecycle of this app, throughout the lifecycle of DevOps, is think about how do I put those together to start, orchestrating my processes. And this starts off with, if we look at, is making sure that integration and testing is happening, right? Those continuous build cycles, making sure that as those are built, just part of the build process is run testing. Be that testing where, you're pounding on the APIs in the application. And one of the things that comes up in testing is, how can I possibly test if, I'm on the developer side, when it needs all these connections outside, And so another thing you have to do is to figure out how you can virtualize kind of the rest of the world. So the developer can actually do testing, and, maybe they're not accessing the mainframe, but they're pretending to access the mainframe, right? Getting that virtualization in there so they can be ensured that what they've created actually works. You're going to move that, you're going to continue orchestrating stuff together further down, or the automation, I shouldn't say stuff, that automation you built in the last step. Now you're orchestrating together. We talked about integration and testing. Next is that delivery and deployment, right? Packaging it up into the right system, and then letting people, click and deploy it to the right configuration, whether that's a deploy into test, whether that's a deploy into production, wherever it needs to deploy, kind of like a parameterized deployment. Let's do it. And then we have to make sure that nowadays, especially, everywhere along this process, people are thinking about security, and, be that in testing, be that in development, be that in deployment. So that's the reducing the latency all across the DevOps lifecycle.
Sorry about that. I got ahead of you there, Shane. So,
oh, sorry.
And then and now we're good.
Yeah, thanks, John. So the last kind of tenet I see here is increasing the visibility. And, that's about closing those loops. A few slides ago, you saw those loops looping back throughout the cycle. And I think this is what we have to do, is we have to make sure that at every point there is some monitoring and assessment going on, and giving it back to the previous step or back to the start so people can understand what's going on. So, for example, a simple thing, right? If we're seeing issues further down the DevOps cycle, say when it starts getting rolled to a production-like environment, that testing results need to feed back, right? Because we can't actually pass that last hurdle to live production until it gets back. So constantly feeding back improvement, improve and iterate's key here.
Okay. So increasing visibility is essential. And as we look at the results from the survey, we see that dev teams are still looking to increase their visibility. But before we look at that data, let's have our first poll.
All right, John, Shane, interesting stuff. So let's put the first question together to our audience. So, folks, if you wouldn't mind just selecting one of the answers from this question, what is the status of your DevOps initiative? First option is we're just exploring in the exploratory stage. Option 2 is we've identified a DevOps team, or we are running a DevOps Pro. We've got several DevOps teams delivering applications, and lastly, we're 100% DevOps house. If anybody answers that question, I'll be pleasantly surprised, and I will quit my job and go and sip margaritas on the beach somewhere.
Exactly.
All right.
And so far, nobody's clicked on that 100%. So you're on the ball.
Okay, folks, please, one of you needs to click on that one. I really would like to enjoy my time off on the beach. All right, so we're looking at 70% being voted. And in your experience, I mean, Shane and John, I know DevOps is a hype now at the moment with everybody. Have you encountered somebody that's fully 100% DevOps enabled?
Well, I think John was talking to some unicorns, as they called them out there, some leading organizations which were there. But I think when we look at the enterprise customers, the bulk of the world out there that haven't gone pure digital, I think we're seeing kind of similar to our results here, where 3/4 of the people are saying, yes, I'm exploring it, I'm doing a few things, and we're seeing about, that's 75%, let's say, we're seeing about 20% of what's left saying, okay, I actually have some initiatives up and running on some of my products, and they're going. And then the last, which we have here in the poll, around 7%, saying, I actually got the cycle down. Yeah.
So let's see how the audience responded here, and then let's take that further. Shane, there you go.
Oh,
exactly as you said.
There's the results. Okay, magic. I was wondering if they were going to come up. So I just kind of talked through this, and so everybody's seeing the results here, which I think is
Shane. Sorry to interrupt you. We've automated everything. This whole webinar works in a DevOps fashion, so it's all fully automated. You just have to click a button.
Oh, yeah. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. Automation everywhere. Okay. Yeah. So this shouldn't surprise too many, and I think the good thing is the majority of you are in that first stage, and so don't feel like you're lagging, right? You're where everybody else is. There's some leaders out there, clearly, especially that 7% that actually are driving through the releases today, which is great. And everybody's just thinking about it. The good thing is you came to this webinar to learn a little more, and hopefully this will help you actually move down to the next step, whatever the next step is for you. Okay, let's go back to the slide.
Okay, and Shane, that's been my experience completely. People are still saying, hey, I know this is important. Maybe they have a pilot out there, but they are still exploring their DevOps journey. So we're all about in the same boat. Okay, let's see. Get to the next slide. All right, so we were talking about visibility, and developers really need to have the visibility into their applications and understanding what goes on. And when we reached out to our respondents, 57% said they lack APM user experience dashboards, 61% lack end-to-end visibility, and 67% have no insight to the line of code that is causing the slow performance or crash. So this is a big deficiency with our the majority of the development and production teams, and they really need to have their central IT step up to provide them a self-service solution that will provide insight into all levels of the development process, ability to delegate monitoring so other teams can drill deeper into that performance issues, and solutions that integrate with the broad coverage of their IT systems. So with the visibility also comes the capability to do assessment of the product no matter where it is in the life cycle. Shane, can you tell us where assessment fits in our DevOps framework?
Yeah, let's talk about it here, John. Okay, right there, thanks.
Yeah.
So first, everybody probably recognize the steps to get an application deployed, right? This is the traditional clearly 3/4 of the people, most of their applications are following roughly this. You get the demands, figure out what you're going to build, you build it, you test it, you try to decide whether it's ready to go. If it's not, just send it back. If it is, you're getting to the point where you can release and get it deployed. And typically that is a long cycle, as we talked about. That could be once a quarter, it could be, twice a year, or for some people that have got that down, maybe they can turn that crank a little faster, but it's still not DevOps. So let's take a look at how this traditional framework changes when we look at what we've created in HP. And this is really the HP Okay, so for a lot of people on the call, you may have watched the news over the weekend and today. So Hewlett-Packard is split into two companies, HP, the traditional printer and laptop company, and HP Enterprise. And we're HP Enterprise. So when I say HPE, that stands for Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. And this is a DevOps framework that we've created over the last 2 years. And it's got, you can see there's 4 main cycles in there. I'm going to take you through each one just a little bit. But let's start with the key is they're all, continuous processes. We've all read in the industry about continuous integration, continuous delivery. These are terms out there. We've expanded that a little more to bring into the fact that, it's not just integrating, but it's also integration and testing, right? They kind of go together. Often it could be the same team. Everybody shares roles in this area. And then you get to the point where now I'm getting ready to deliver and deploy it. There's a little bit of difference there is in continuous delivery versus continuous deployment. What we're saying is when I actually say go in continuous deployment, it means go all the way to production. And so to get it all the way to production, then we're into that last cycle, which is we talk about as continuous operations, where seamlessly it went from ready to go to actually up in production. And to be up in production in probably almost everybody's company here means that they're getting the the visibility in what's going on. What we have labeled there as operations teams able to have all their processes in place if there's issues with the deployment, as well as having monitoring to know what's going on. And that leads to that big cycle on the outside, which we call continuous assessment. We're going to drill into a little bit on the next slide. Well, here we are. We're right here. So in continuous assessment, John's just in time. He's DevOps here too. So what we're talking about here is making sure that everybody in this cycle understands and knows what's going on. And this assessment is just not about, I'm sorry, I should say it's not just about, how are the servers and the network performing, but it's also about how are those applications performing. Because if you think back, the person that's, building this application and designing it isn't too concerned with it's a CPU or the server that it's running on really busy. What they're concerned about is how are the users using it? What are they doing with it? How is it responsive to their needs? When they click on the, that OK button in it, or the, the Go Do It button and get the data back, is it responsive to their needs? And so that's about measuring the user experience, because that is what really gives the continuous assessment information back for people to make changes. And how are we doing that, and what is our framework indicator and how to get there? One of the most important things is in the lower left, you see something called shift left. It's in the lower left. And what we mean by that is making sure that all the way upstream during this continuous process, people have access to feedback about what's going on with the application. And we're going to drill into that a little more. But what it really gets down to is making sure that you're letting the developer or the tester or anybody in the process understand right now with the code that I just released or the code that I just fixed. I just made some changes. I changed, potentially I just moved from one database technology to another database technology. What is my performance like? We want to make sure that everybody has those questions right away. They don't have to wait till it's off in production, but they can get that information as soon as possible. So making sure that people to the left, where all the way to the right, of course, is running in production, have that information, that continuous assessment, that monitoring information for them to make decisions.
Great. So, Shane was speaking about shift left, and that's really about moving monitoring out of being exclusively in production and moving that into development. So here's a really interesting stat that came from our study. Once again, the dark colors are organizations that deploy on a monthly basis, and the lighter color are those organizations that deploy on a daily basis. Organizations that do daily deployments have a much higher usage of APM in the dev and testing cycle. So we see development, 57% of the users on a monthly basis use APM in the development cycle, whereas on the those that release daily have an 82% prevalence of usage of APM in the development cycle. So that's really interesting, where these companies that are great at DevOps are pushing APM into the development and testing cycle much more so than those that are just getting there. So Shane, let's another striking stat about this. Let's take a look at a couple of the best practices.
Okay, thanks, John. And I think, you know, one of the best practices. So maybe what I'll say about this best practice I'm going to talk about here is it's been available for a while, and some people have taken advantage of it. What it's about is, if you look at the boxes across the top, we're talking about an application's up, and I'm going to be doing some testing on it. And I'm going to actually not just do testing as does it work as a functionality there, but I want to do some load testing. I want to know what's going to happen if 50 users come in at once and start using this application. It's going to work. What happens if 100 or 1,000 users come in? What's going on? And the idea is do that load testing, collect that data, use that information, and you know there's going to be information people care about. You know, is it working? Well, actually, let's go back. Is the end user experience still good when there's 100 people using it? And so this best practice I'm talking about here is on the left-hand side is our testing application that they're doing the load testing. On the right-hand side is the monitoring application, monitoring this exact same application and making sure that what we're seeing in production, and we say, let's say it's supposed to take 10 seconds, is it taking those 10 seconds, or is it taking 2 seconds, or is it taking 20? And making sure that loop's closed. And so here, continuous feedback between what the developer and the testing people believe it should behave like in production and what production is seeing.
Right, and that relies on having that service and virtualization, right? That to make sure that you can do an accurate testing in
yep.
Oh, excuse me. Yep, after load testing. Okay,
and so here's an example of that same best practices, kind of drilled down little different screenshots to show you that that experience. Over here, you know, we have on the left again, we have the testing application simulating users, and on the right-hand side, we have the feedback. And in this case, you know, one of the things I mentioned on the last slide is, you know, people are going to have expectations because you're going to test it in development, and you're going to realize I have a target that the business people might have said that this needs to perform. Let's say when this page comes up, it comes up in 3 seconds. The results of, say, clicking on the OK button, the next page comes up in 3 seconds. They simulated it in testing, as John was talking about, to make sure it was doing it. Now we're in production, and one of the things you can do in these tools is you can actually share that SLA all the way through the cycle. So the testing people see the SLA of 3 seconds, the production people see the SLA of 3 seconds, and then when it's not meeting it, like the kind of that app in the lower right, you know, it's not meeting its goal, it's taking too long, feeding that back into that continuous assessment.
Great. So those two examples there of how customers are using the APM proactively rather than just waiting to start monitoring in production. So let's take a look at how mature DevOps organizations manage the customer experience. When we talked about shift left or moving monitoring out of exclusively being in production and into development, here's another really interesting stat that came from our study. On the left in the darker color is the shops that are deploying on a monthly basis. On the right, we have companies that are deploying on a daily basis. Organizations that do daily deployments are much more likely to use APM proactively, meaning they're not waiting for trouble tickets to come their way. They're using synthetic monitoring dashboards and alerts to help them catch trouble before it impacts the customers.
Yeah, if you think about this, in DevOps environment, everybody in the team owns, takes responsibility for the application. It's not this handoff. Oh, it's not my issues. It's the guy to the left of me or the right of me. But in DevOps, they actually truly own the application. This gives them a much greater sense of the responsibility for the application performance and the related customer experience. So, of course, they're using the APM tools.
Great. So 93%. So almost all the DevOps teams there. All right. So we've got our second poll question, and then let's talk about how HP Enterprise is meeting the requirements of DevOps organizations.
So you can see the questions up there.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was being on mute.
Okay.
All right. So, folks, it's time for the second poll now. Who uses your APM tools, dashboards, and reports? Just the Ops team, Ops and Dev and QA when there's a problem. Ops, Dev, and QA use APM. Ops, Dev, QA, and across lines of business use reports and no dashboards. So let's see how that works. And I form part of Dev and QA. Actually, I form part of QA myself. So it'll be interesting to see who votes for option number 2. And another question, John and Shane. I mean, you covered briefly about it in the beginning, but we get a lot of questions as well when we go to speak to our clients about whether DevOps is about tools or whether it's about the methodology. So while the people are voting now, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. It's really about the methodology, I believe. John, let's have you.
Oh, I was going to say people, process, and technology, right? That's
there you go.
Yeah. You can't leave one without the other.
Yeah.
But it definitely isn't tools driven. That's the key.
Right.
Totally agree.
Everybody comes together.
All right. So let's see how the polls are looking like so far. We've got 53% of the people have voted. I don't see any votes coming in. So let's have a look at the results.
Okay.
And there you go.
Well, wow. First thing that jumps out to me on this is it's great. APM tools are used in every answer here, and a pretty good spread. If you look, 50% in the middle there, 25 and 25, which I think is good because now you can see that even though in the audience here, most people said they really hadn't started their DevOps plan or implementation. The good thing is there a lot of everybody. I mean, let's see here, everybody that answered. There's a lot of emphasis on APM in different spots, which is a key part of getting your DevOps methodology going.
And I think that's an issue that I see from time to time is as people start moving towards DevOps initiatives, they're putting their assessment tools kind of on the back burner. They're worried about the heavy lifting with deployment and delivery and continuous integration, and they're not really thinking about APM tools. But we know that companies that are great at DevOps use their APM tools to a big degree in their DevOps initiative. So, okay, so let's roll on. So we've been talking about DevOps and APM, and certainly we all understand why we need APM and why being proactive and pushing APM earlier into the cycle. And the reason is because they don't want to use their customers as their test bed and need to protect their brand. In the case of United, you can imagine that the stress that this created when they had this huge outage, and it really impacted the entire organization. What we all want to avoid, it's the IT walk of shame when you have to go to the CIO to avoid an outage. So the earlier we can push APM, the better we're going to have, better experience we're going to have for our customers. So when the strategy and solution is in place for managing your business applications, you should basically expect the following outcomes. You'd like to experience a reduced mean time to resolution. A solution should result in a faster isolation and repair of your issues. You want to keep your customers happy and a very low user abandonment rate and high App Store ratings. you should also have the ability to prevent outages that affect your users. And that fixing things early in the cycle saves tons of cost on the back end. What is it, 100% or 300% more to fix it in production than in development? It's truly a significant difference. And what you really are looking for is a single solution that will allow you to visualize the performance and availability of your applications across any app type, across both real user monitoring and proactive monitoring. And you want a 360-degree end-to-end view that integrates user experience and infrastructure health. So getting that combined view to really understand what the customer experience is and where any underlying issues might lie. And think about your own business and ask, how do you do it today? Are you guys able to do this and really see where the slowdowns are occurring? So you also need to be able to combat the complexity that contributes to long problem isolation times. If you're in IT, you've been in a war room, and very, very difficult to identify root cause. You want to be able to isolate for a specific app version, a specific user flow, a specific third-party service that you rely on. You need to be able to understand this throughout your infrastructure that's supporting your applications. And then finally, this is the ability to predict outages is something that's truly essential in today's world. You want a solution that's capable of alerting you to anomalies based on advanced predictive analytics and have that built into your APM solutions. Manual settings of thresholds can be, it's really, can't really do that anymore. It's just too many apps, too much complexity. We want to be able to identify and catch issues early enough that you can get away from the false alerts and really identify what the real issues are that are going to be impacting your applications. So Shane.
Everyone. Oh, sorry, John.
Oh, no problem. And I was just going to say, let's talk about some of that proactive end user monitoring.
Okay, thanks, John. So what I'm going to talk about is one of the HPE solutions where we want to make sure we can, verify that the application is up and running. And in this case, basically think of it as robotic playback engine or a synthetic transaction. The same thing we were talking about before is when the testing team was, pretending to have 1,000 users, they're banging hard on the application here, and kind of in the production side, maybe we're talking about, checking every 15 minutes is the app up and running. And so you're going to develop that script in step 1 here. We're going to reuse the testing script. Hopefully they're shared between the groups. And then what you want to do is in your production environment, you want to make sure you're monitoring it in a way that reflects how your users are using it. And what I meant is, where are they located? What are they doing? It may be that, you're distributed around the world, as in this application. There's some people in Switzerland, right? There's some people in Singapore, and there's a few here in New York. Or maybe, you're a U.S. based, and you got to worry about the people in Florida and the people in Washington State. You don't care about the ones in Hawaii because you're going to go visit them in person if they have problems. But the idea here is, make sure you're understanding where you're, coming from the viewpoint of where your users are coming from, not just inside the data center, right, where your application might be. And so you're launching that synthetic script and you're watching its flow, knowing how each step is, how is it performing, are people that are going along, are they crashing, and so you're both looking at, is it available and is it performing well? And so you're verifying that that business service is up and running. And there's a graphic missing on number 4 there. I don't know, John, if it's part of automation or.
Oh, there it is.
We go. Thanks. Yep, sorry, that's my fault. So what we're also doing is making sure that that information that is being collected is being shared. You know, again, part of that assessment. So in this case, we have a showing up in basically a reporting console that other people can take a look at, right? In this case, everything happens to be green right now, but you can imagine if some of these are red, everybody that needs to be involved in the team is seeing it and using it. Right. Also, one thing I mentioned, I'm going to go back, John, go back to the last slide. So up there in step 1, when I was talking about developing that script, you may have noticed in the picture there's a couple phones, and this clearly is a, these are virtual phones. I don't even know what model they are, but you see them up there. And you also need to keep in mind that you're simulating these transactions from the environment that your customer is coming from, not just a location, which I talked about, but if it's a mobile application, you want to make sure that you're testing it with a mobile application, be that a physical piece of mobile hardware or whether it's a virtual. That's your choice, right? But you need to be able to do both. And we've had a lot of customers that have come back and said, but I need to run it on a mobile phone, on an, let's say an AT&T, wireless connection. And we say, okay. And so that's something they need to do, and that's something they can do with our tools. So again, where the users are at and whatever technology they're using, whether it's a browser or a phone. Okay, John, let's go to the next slide. So the next step is, in the last one we were looking at synthetic transactions, and now we're taking a look at actually watching the real users using the application. And again, real users. They could be coming from a phone, they could be coming from a browser, they could be coming from, well, that's going to be 90% of the cases, or it could just be an application they've built. But the key is watching what they're doing and actually understanding. I'm trying to be specific here because it might be I have an application and one of my commands I'm holding my phone. You guys can't see me holding my phone, but I'm holding my phone, and right, I might zoom in, right? You go, do I care about what happens when the user zooms in on a picture? Maybe I do, right? And so maybe that's information you want to make sure you've collected. Other times, maybe you're happy just collecting, when they actually hit the OK button, right? You get to choose what level of visibility you want and collect that. But the visibility you're choosing is based so that you can give that information back to the DevOps team, right? So they can improve the next version. So that's part of what's choosing. So that was step 1. We talked about whether they're using a browser or a phone. Step 2, you're collecting that information. And then that's going into the back end, right? And now you want to collect some more information, not just the user experience, but that journey it's taking, because we know that every enterprise app is very complex, right? There's databases involved, there's multiple servers involved, and so you're also collecting information across that path to help you understand, okay, right, they're on their mobile phone in step 2 here, but was my bottleneck the database or the mainframe or the web server? Bringing all that information together to make real decisions. Okay? Let's go to the next slide, John. There we go. Okay, and so now we've identified, right? Was it the phone? Was it one of those back-end servers? And let's say we want to drill in a little and see where in one of those back-end servers there was a problem. And so how am I going to isolate it? And it may be that that issue is happening. Let's say it's could be a commercial off-the-shelf product. It could be something that it's just been customized. Or it could be something that the engineers have written themselves. But a lot of time, whatever these apps are, they're going to be sitting in either a Microsoft Windows platform, a .NET framework, or a Java platform. And so we need sometimes to look inside there. So let's just step through the steps on the slide here. So number 1, proactive notification. So basically, if something's going wrong, remember I'm monitoring across all those endpoints from the phone all the way through the multiple servers. I got to make sure people are seeing that, tickets are being opened in the incident management system, or red lights are going on in the NOC dashboard, whatever needs to happen. Number 2 is I want to figure out where is that happening, right? That's why I had the multiple monitoring points. You really can't see it in this graphic, but it turns out in the 5th column at the top it's red and not orange. So it's an example of we know it's crashing here. Okay, so now I found out where it's crashing. And in step 3, let's look inside that crash. And in this case, I happen to be a Java application that we're using here. So I've looked down inside, or remember, we have different personas in DevOps team. It may be that the only person that cares about this low level information inside this Java app is a developer, but you still need to capture it, right? It's part of that information you need, and who gets to use it to make their decision could be across the whole DevOps team. So in this case, I've drilled down into that Java code, my monitoring information, collected it, and it's showing me, I got some reds and some greens, and I got information here that clearly the development team is going to help them figure out where the bottleneck was. And in step 4, okay, so which one of these multiple steps is the real issue? And in this case, maybe I have a stack trace that actually shows here is the crash, here was the information that happened that led up to that crash, and in this case, in the final step 4, you see red on the right and then various shades of yellow and brown on the other side. That's showing the path all the way down to the crash. And again, making sure the development team understands that maybe it only crashes when they follow these 3 exact steps and then it crashes, whereas if they get to that 4th step through some other route, it's okay. So again, information to get to that root cause quicker, help you fix that issue, get that next iteration out there. Okay? So let's talk about the next step is, okay, that was assuming that I had to go in and, something went red, something crashed, and I had to fix it. But what about getting in front of that, right? What can I do to make sure that I know about these issues before users start calling, right? Before we're getting too many crashes, and that's where we look at it from a predictive standpoint. Can I proactively alert somebody? And in the top here, we're talking about if I have a history of what's going on in this application, I should be able to, estimate or predict that something's going to happen. And this at the top here, we're talking about looking at historic behavior. It might be as simple as we know on Friday afternoon it gets slow, or maybe every 2 weeks on payday it runs really slow, or it's the end of the year, it's April 14th, and they're all submitting their taxes in the U.S. and things are slow. So those are patterns that are going to happen. You don't really need to alert on them. You can see they're a little bit out of band, but that happens. On Friday, if this was a performance decision, I'm okay. I don't need to alert. But getting in front of that, and maybe that only gives you 5 minutes notice. Maybe it gives you 50 minutes. Maybe it gives you 5 hours. But having it there to try to avoid many users being impacted is what you're getting at. One of the other things in kind of the predictive analytics is looking at everything you have and applying what we call big data analytics to that operations data. Be it the log files, the metrics, the topology, events that are being generated anywhere, mixing that together and saying, what is an outlier? What's wrong? And this again lets people focus on what might be happening. In this case, the app's still running, but I'm getting some noise out here, right? In this case, the line's kind of pointing to some red things at the top of the screen. Maybe it turns out that 2% of your users, it's taking 20 seconds, but the average is still fine, right? The average says 3 seconds, I'm okay, I'm meeting my SLA. But what about those handful of users that are at 20 seconds? Maybe I should do something about it. Again, maybe this falls into a predictive pattern. Maybe I should alert the fact that, 1/10 of 1% of my users are outside of the bandwidth. Should I do something? So you're mixing these technologies together. And the last screen I have on here is triaging across technologies. Because so I've moved a little outside of predictive, but I've said, okay, I know something's wrong, but I don't know where it's wrong, right? And so now I'm going to go in and look, and this is where I take advantage of the fact that I have all those types of technologies, be those networking events, be that, performance from my end user, everything mixed together, looking at them and trying to say that, oh, actually I believe this is what caused the problem to happen, because if I went back and looked and an hour ago, a switch went down or whatever, and we rerouted traffic on a busy network, now my performance slow. So to be able to look at that and look at that over time to help troubleshoot it. So that's where we bring in predictive, which is really the last step. We started by looking at synthetic transactions, then we looked at real users, then we drilled in to figure out where is the problem, all the way down to the line of code where possible. And now we've kind of summed it up with saying, but what if I can avoid all that by getting in front of it and predictively announcing the problems there and getting a team on it before too many users are calling in. Okay. So John, let's go to the next poll I think we're ready for.
Right. Yes,
Perfect.
we are ready for the next poll. So the third poll for the day, winners of this poll will win an iPad to go home with. Not. Are you currently monitoring your mobile applications? Yes, we have complete visibility from client to server. Yes, but only for the supporting backend services. Yes, but only at the client level with crash reports. And no, we do not monitor our mobile application. This should be interesting. Let's see what the people are going to start voting now.
And this is really huge. Great. Because the mobile applications are really kind of our brand image. I mean, that's where more customers interact with us than ever before. And, you know, the phones have given them this sense of immediacy, and they want a response right away, despite whatever network or application or back-end challenges there may be. So I'll be interested in understanding how people are using mobile monitoring.
Yep, and see what's happening here. We've got 62% of the vote. I don't see anything coming through, so let's have a look at how the answers look like. Interesting.
And yeah. You know, one of the things John just mentioned is, you know, how important mobile applications are to our customers out there, or your customers, right? And we're seeing a lot of people, you know, aren't really looking at the mobile applications, which we know from a brand experience of your company is critical.
Great. All right. So, got a couple more slides here on the research study. Once again, in the dark color, we have all the participants in the study. In the lighter color, we have those that are deploying on a daily basis. When we look at mature DevOps teams, they rate the benefits they get from APM as better across the board. And this is really because they value APM and demand the right tools. So I was really interested in these results, and so I got the data sliced in a different manner. I asked the data team to look at the difference between companies, between the entire group of respondents in dark versus only those who had excellent deployments, meaning that they had very rarely had issues with new releases or deployments. And here's the net. Companies understand the value of APM. They want better tools. If you have an excellent release history, your APM tools are better. And we see that across the board, whether we're looking at being able to drill down to a line of code or user experience dashboards for the line of business, or having that end-to-end visibility that we were talking about to identify where the slowdowns are occurring. So, wrapping up here. At the speed of business, it's clear that DevOps helps drive innovation and an excellent customer experience. And those companies using DevOps at a high level rely on APM tools throughout their development cycle. And with the breadth of application protocols or predictive analytics and flexible deployment options, both cloud and on-premise, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise is ready to meet those challenges. So this takes us to our Q&A session. If you'd like to have more information on how we deliver both APM and DevOps, got a couple of shortcuts for you. And any Q&A do we have time for? We have 5 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. John, we got one question in the queue. Actually, looks like a couple of questions in the queue, but we'd like a few more from out there. The first one is, can you discuss how companies are using APM in their development processes? You want to start with that, John?
Sure. Yeah. Go ahead, Shane. You can answer.
Okay. So I'll look at it as what we've seen, in especially on the mobile initiative you saw. You know, from an HP standpoint, we actually have a tool targeted at mobile, and we delivered it as a software as a service, so that the developers could really start taking advantage of the APM tools, so they don't have to. You know, often when you think about monitoring tools and production monitoring, you're thinking about a lot of infrastructure, but what we try to do is make sure that we've created tools that people can use, because we were getting the demand from the development team that said, I don't want to learn how to use tools, I just want to consume them. So that's what we're seeing is even small teams, teams of just a handful of people, are wanting to use tools to see how it's working out there, the real experience. And so that's what we focused on.
Great.
All right, there's a couple of more questions in the queue. There was a slide that mentioned reusing scripts from testing to production. I know where that question comes from. So how does that work?
Okay.
Right. I'm actually, on that note, by the way, we're going to have a similar webinar about DevOps very soon, in which we will be showing our blueprint of DevOps on top of HP Tools. And that is actually exactly where we will be showing how the handshake goes from QA into production and back from production into QA. But I'll leave you to it. I will steal your thunder later on, not now.
Okay, thanks. What we're really talking about there in reusing the scripts is, typically the scripts are captured by recording the user activity, be that on their phone, be that on their web browser. And so they're going to record those, and just like, the person developing the app is testing it, they're going into the browser and just keying in the 5 or 6 steps, right? They could just as easily, basically click on the record button in our tools, record that, and simply replay it over and over again. And so they've saved off this recording, and it's not a recording as in screenshots, but it's a recording of what really happened in the back end, right? The fact that this page came up and the user filled in information in this field and then clicked on the OK button. We really don't care what the screen looked like, right? Because that's going to be information. But the fact that they entered something into a field and the fact that they clicked on the OK button or the do it button is very important. So we've recorded that off into a form, and that same exact recording could be used by the production team to play it, over and over in production as well.
Right, and adding those parameters in there so that they can, as the environment changes slightly for the back-end services, that they can be updated, right?
Right.
Okay.
Okay, I think we're down to about 2 minutes.
Yep.
Let's hold off on the questions. Any others we'll get in there. We'll try to put online with the webinar. But let's move ahead.
Okay. So that's a wrap. On behalf of the entire team here at the new Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, on behalf of Shane and Mihai and myself, thank you so much for attending. I think we got a couple of wrap-up slides and or business slides, and we can say thank you very much for attending.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Shane. Wonderful job at explaining to us what DevOps is and how APM plays a vital part in it. And yes, we have a few wrapping slides to go through. So folks, for everybody who's on the call now, HP Discover is upon us again, happening in London in 2015 in early December. If you go and use this Unit Vivit link when you register for your London trip, you can get an early bird discount, which is actually quite significant. So make sure you get the early bird discount by going to that link that's shown on the screen. Next slide, please, John. We will also be present at HP Discover. We have a Vivit booth in the transformation zone, so make sure to come through. We got lots of goodies, by the way. I love the Vivit stuff, the bags and the pens and the USB stuff. So make sure you come through. All the great Vivit stuff is there, and we'll have a good laugh. And we also have the breakout sessions with Vivit Discover in London. As you can see on the screen, we've got Gordon Appleby, we've got Mark Laird, we've got Mick Kirsten, and Pedro Miguel Jerónimo Mendez, who are going to be talking on those particular dates with topics like service and network virtualization, with improving the customer experience with the HP Profile and avatars. DevOps, again, DevOps is a chief topic there, and then about protecting your business, so most likely about security stuff. So that's in a nice wrap. We would like to thank you for participating today and taking the time to join the webinar. If you would be so kind to go and complete a short survey, and also visit our websites and just make sure you stay in tune with whatever's going on in there. So with that being said, again, thank you everybody for attending. Have a nice day. Goodbye.